The wilderness of Blackwood Ridge, carved between Alaska and the Yukon border, was the kind of place the world pretended was beautiful until it tried living there. In documentaries, the ridge was a cathedral of snow and silence, a spectacle for pilots, photographers, and rich tourists who flew over it in heated helicopters and said things like, "Nature is humbling." But for the few who lived on the ground, on foot, in the dirt and the cold, Blackwood Ridge had another face, a quieter one, a truer one, a deadly one. Silas Kincaid knew that face better than anyone. A former military police K-Chin handler, he had come to the far north for one reason: to disappear, to leave behind the ghosts of a mission gone wrong, to live in a place harsh enough to match the storm inside him. His cabin, a fortress of cedar logs and steel bolts, sat on a rise overlooking frozen riverbeds and endless pine forests that stretched into nothing. The nearest neighbor was 40 miles away. The nearest road was buried under 10 feet of snow for 8 months a year. Silas preferred it that way. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a beard grown more for insulation than style, and eyes the color of chipped flint, 38 years old. But solitude carved a kind of agelessness into him. Time didn't move the same out here. The seasons did. Tonight, winter was winning. A storm had begun rolling over the mountains long before the sun went down. Not a gentle snowfall, but a brutal whiteout that erased the sky and horizon. The kind of storm that didn't just threaten, it hunted. Silas secured the last shutter on his cabin window and tested the bolts. The wind screamed through the trees, bending them like they were nothing but matchsticks. The temperature had already dropped low enough to freeze exposed skin in under a minute. He pulled his glove tighter and circled the cabin, checking the propane tanks, the snowmobile, the tools. All part of the ritual. The routine kept him sane. Predictability was survival. He was heading toward the door when a sound cut through the storm. A sound that shouldn't exist in the wild. Clink, 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 metal striking metal. Rhythmic, faint, wrong. Silas froze. His breath crystallized immediately in his beard. That wasn't nature. That wasn't wind. And it damn sure wasn't an animal. His instincts, the ones he tried so hard to bury, snapped back into place. The soldier inside him stood up. He pulled the thermal monocular from his belt and pressed it to his eye. The display cut through the white chaos in a tunnel of green and black vision. Trees, snowdrifts, a hare darting for cover. Nothing unusual. He panned slowly, sweeping the ridge, the riverbed. Then, a flicker, a faint heat signature. Small, irregular, nearly swallowed by the storm. It came from the frozen riverbed, 300 yards past his property line. Too big for a hare, too still for a wolf, too wrong to ignore. Silas lowered the monocular, his jaw set. Damn it. Isolation would have to wait. He moved quickly, grabbing his emergency sled, bolt cutters, and rifle. Snowshoes snapped onto his boots as he pushed into the storm. The wind slammed into him like a living thing, trying to shove him backward. But Silas Kincaid had walked through worse. In hotter places, with louder ghosts. He forced his way across the snowfield, each step sinking knee-deep into powder. His breathing was harsh in his ears. The storm roared. The world shrank to a tunnel of white. The shape finally came into view. At first, it looked like a misshapen boulder, then a box. Then, Silas's blood went cold. It was a steel transport cage, half buried under drifts. Not the kind used for pets, the kind used to transport dangerous wildlife. He approached, rifle up, breath sharp. Inside the cage was a woman, curled into a ball, body shaking violently, wearing nothing but a shredded business suit covered with a thin, blood-stained tarp. Her wrists were bound with duct tape, her ankles zip-tied so tight the plastic cut into her skin. Her lips were blue, her fingers waxy. She was minutes from death, and pressed against her side, like a living shield, was a massive Rottweiler, his muzzle taped shut, his legs bound, his body positioned between her and the windward side of the cage. Even freezing, the dog met Silas's light with a burning, furious gaze. He growled a choked, muffled sound beneath the taped muzzle. Silas's heart dropped. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a lost hiker. This was execution by hypothermia. He scanned the cage. Something was stuck to the top, a laminated file folder, frozen to the metal. He ripped it off. Bold black marker slashed across the cover. Case closed. Permanently. Silas felt a cold anger settle deep inside him. He didn't know who these people were, but he knew one thing. Whoever put them here meant them to die slowly. He didn't waste another second. With a grunt, he grabbed his axe and smashed the frozen padlock until it shattered. He threw the cage door open and went straight to the dog. A panicked Rottweiler could take off a man's hand, but this dog didn't snap when Silas sliced the tape from his muzzle. He didn't bite. He immediately turned and licked the woman's face, whining softly. Loyalty like that wasn't taught. It was earned. Silas cut the bindings from the dog's legs, but the animal collapsed, too cold to stand. He moved to the woman's skin pale as marble, pulse barely there. "Not tonight," Silas muttered. "You're not dying tonight." He lifted her carefully, wrapped her in a thermal blanket, and strapped her onto the sled. Then he hauled the heavy Rottweiler up and laid him across her chest, covering both with a wool tarp. "Stay with her," he told the dog. "Keep her warm." The dog's tail thumped once a weak, exhausted sign of obedience. And with that, Silas began the brutal trek back. The storm clawed at him. The sled dragged like lead behind him. His muscles burned. His breath came in fire-sharp gasps. But he did not stop. Not when his legs trembled. Not when the wind tried to shove him sideways. Not when the cold bit into his bones. He made it to the cabin. He kicked the door shut behind him, sealing out the storm, and dragged the sled to the fire. His cabin, once a sanctuary, transformed into a battlefield triage. The woman barely clung to life. The dog wasn't far behind. Silas worked fast. Heat packs, IV fluids, blankets, fire roaring. Every few seconds, he checked the shutters, because something gnawed at him. If someone left them to die, they might have stayed close to watch. Or, they might come back to finish the job. He grabbed his rifle, loaded it, and as the fire crackled and the storm howled outside, Silas Kincaid understood something he hadn't realized in a long time. He wasn't alone on the mountain anymore, and whatever war these two had dragged with them, it had just arrived at his doorstep. The fire roared inside Silas's cabin, fighting back the cold that had nearly claimed the two strangers lying on the floor. The storm outside battered the wooden walls like a living beast, rattling the shutters and moaning through the seams. But inside warmth returned. Slowly, reluctantly. Silas knelt beside the woman first. Her breathing was shallow. Her pulse flickered under his fingers like a nervous bird. But she was alive. Barely. He wrapped another heated blanket around her and checked her pupils. They reacted sluggishly, but they reacted. That was something. Next, he turned to the Rottweiler. The dog was curled tight against her side, as if refusing to surrender his post even in unconsciousness. His fur was packed with ice, his nose dry, his paws cracked from cold. Silas worked steadily, thawing the ice, rubbing circulation back into the dog's legs, checking for breaks or frostbite. The animal didn't growl, didn't resist, just trembled, too weak to do anything else. "You're a good boy," Silas murmured. He didn't even realize he'd said it aloud until the dog's tail twitched once. Silas allowed himself the smallest breath of relief. He moved to the stove, boiled water, brewed strong tea, and mixed a hydration solution. When he turned back, the woman's eyelids fluttered. Her lips parted. A faint sound escaped, cracked, voiceless. Silas knelt quickly beside her. "You're safe," he said. "You're in my cabin. You're going to be okay." Her eyes tried to open. One lid lifted a fraction, revealing a dark iris glazed with cold, confusion, and fear. She whispered something, but it came out as a rasp. Silas leaned closer. What are you trying to say?" Her fingers twitched weakly against the blanket. A breath, a tremor, and then, barely audible, "Not safe." Silas froze. The words were sandpaper on her throat, torn by cold and exhaustion, but unmistakable. "Not safe," she repeated, a little clearer. They'll come back." Her body convulsed in a burst of panic. She tried to sit up but collapsed, coughing violently. Silas steadied her carefully. "Easy. Easy. You're injured. You're dehydrated. You're hypothermic." He eased her back down. "No one is getting to you here. You're safe." Her breathing sped up, rapid and terrified. She shook her head weakly. "No, you don't understand." She swallowed hard, fighting to speak. "They didn't leave us to die. They left us, to be found." Silas felt the bottom of his stomach drop. The laminated folder flashed in his mind. Case closed. Permanently. Before he could ask more, the dog lifted his head suddenly, ears snapping forward, muscles stiffening beneath the blanket. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Silas went still. Dogs didn't react like that without reason. He rose, crossed the cabin, and grabbed his rifle from the wall. The storm howled outside, masking all other noise, but the dog continued to stare at the door, growling deeper, louder. Silas checked the peephole. Nothing but white. He moved to the window. Still nothing. He flicked off the generator lights, plunging the cabin into dim firelight. The dog's growling softened but didn't stop. Minutes passed. Long ones. Then, a faint sound cut through the wind. A distant mechanical hum. Silas's blood ran cold. A drone. Military grade by the sound of it. High rotor pitch. Stable. Not a toy. Not something lost in a storm. He grabbed the thermal monocular and pressed it to the glass. A faint heat signature hovered above the tree line, small, spherical, steady. It wasn't looking for wildlife. It was searching. Silas whispered toward the woman. "Who did this? Who's hunting you?" Her voice cracked. "You have to run. You don't know what they are." Silas clenched his jaw. He knew enough. Whoever they weren't amateurs. They had gear. They were watching. And they were patient. But they'd made one mistake. They'd come into his wilderness. He moved quickly, barricading the shutters and killing every visible light source. Then he pulled the woman closer to the fire and inspected her injuries again. Deep bruising around her ribs, cuts on her arms and wrists, signs of restraint far older than the time spent in the cage. Her body told a story long before her voice could. He poured warm water into a cup. "Drink," he said gently. Her trembling hands couldn't hold the cup, so he guided it to her lips. She sipped shakily, her throat working hard. Silas spoke quietly. "What's your name?" Her brow creased. She tried to answer. Nothing came out. She swallowed. Tried again. "Elena." The name drifted out like a ghost. Silas nodded. "Elena. I'm Silas." She blinked slowly, trying to focus. "They'll kill you. Because you saw us." Silas didn't react immediately. He finished checking her pulse, adjusting the blanket, making sure the dog was warming up. Only then did he answer. "Let them try." The first signs of war. For the next 2 hours, Silas moved nonstop. He treated frostbite, cleaned minor wounds, gave Elena small sips of electrolyte solution, checked the dog's vitals, reinforced the barricades around the cabin, monitored the storm. The drone didn't return, or if it did, it stayed higher, out of thermal range. That worried him more. Smart enemies didn't make noise twice. By midnight, Elena's color had improved slightly. Her breathing steadied. The dog, still without a name, lay curled beside her, his head resting protectively across her legs. Silas finally sat on the edge of the table, rubbing a hand through his hair. "What the hell did I just step into?" he muttered. He gazed at Elena again. In the firelight, her face looked younger, early 30s, strong features, even beneath the bruises. A person used to pressure. A person who'd seen things others didn't survive. He could see the remnants of a badge holder clip on what was left of her suit jacket. "Law enforcement?" he asked quietly. Her eyes opened a sliver, and the fear in them was answer enough. Silas exhaled slowly. He'd worked with enough prosecutors and agents to recognize the look. She wasn't running from petty criminals. She was running from men who could afford drones, cages, and execution by wilderness. And they weren't finished. Silas rose and moved to the window again. The storm was starting to break, slowly. The kind of clearing that gave predators better visibility. Shadows shifted beyond the tree line. Silas lifted the monocular. No heat signatures. No movement. But something didn't feel right. The forest was too still. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. Behind him, Elena whispered, "Silas." He turned. Her eyes were open now fully. Fear sharpened her gaze. Her voice, faint but urgent, pushed through cracked lips. "They won't come in the storm," she said. "They'll come when it clears." Silas tightened his grip on the monocular. Of course they would. He stepped to the gun rack and pulled down a second rifle, an older bolt-action he kept for emergencies. He checked the chamber. Loaded. He looked back at the woman and the dog. Then I'll be ready. By dawn, the storm had died. What remained was a world carved from ice and silence. The sky, once a swirling chaos of snow and fury, now stretched open pale blue and cruelly calm. The kind of calm that didn't bring peace. Silas had seen this before. In war zones. In wilderness rescues. In the minutes before an ambush. The world held its breath. The danger stepped forward. He stood by the window, rifle resting against his forearm, eyes narrowed at the tree line. The snow outside sparkled under the first weak rays of sun, turning the forest into a field of diamonds. Beautiful, deceptive, deadly. Behind him, Elena slept, her breathing steadier now, though her body remained fragile, wrapped in blankets near the fire. The Rottweiler lay curled at her side, head on her hip, chest rising and falling with slow, heavy breaths, recovering, but not fully. Silas checked on them one more time, then returned to scanning the horizon. They would come, not because Elena had warned him, not because the drone had appeared, but because men who used cages as execution chambers didn't simply walk away when the plan failed. A failure like that demanded cleanup, and Silas's cabin was now the mess they needed to erase. The first sign. It came at bay. Muy buena. Not sound. Not movement. A color. A glint, tiny, sharp, metallic, buried against the line of pines, almost invisible to an untrained eye. Silas saw it instantly. A scope reflecting the early sun. He moved from the window in one smooth motion. They're here, he said. Elena stirred, eyes blinking open. She tried to sit upright and winced, clutching her ribs. The dog lifted his head, ears angling forward. A soft growl vibrated in his chest, low, warning, instinctive. Silas grabbed his gloves and rifle. Stay down, he told them both. No matter what you hear, stay behind the stone wall. Elena swallowed hard. How many? Silas paused. He didn't know the exact number. But men with drones didn't work alone. Men who used cages didn't hesitate. Men who stamped case closed didn't leave witnesses. Enough, Silas said. More than I'd like. He shifted a heavy oak dresser in front of the door, reinforcing the barricade. Then he slid through the side vestibule, a narrow hallway leading to a reinforced hatch that opened beneath the cabin deck, his escape route, his vantage point, his battlefield. He stepped outside into the frozen morning. The cold bit instantly, but Silas didn't flinch. He crouched behind a snowbank and scanned the trees again, this time through the rifle scope. The glint remained, motionless. A sniper. Experienced. Patient. Professional. Silas exhaled slowly. Okay, he muttered. Let's dance. The first shot. It came from the trees, sharp, precise, silent, except for the crack of air splitting. Silas dove behind the snowbank as the round tore into the wood pillar just inches above where his head had been. He rolled, brought the rifle up, and returned fire quick, measured, suppressive, not to hit, but to disrupt. The sniper ducked. That confirmed it. This wasn't some random hunter or amateur. This was tactical. Silas moved low, sweeping through the snow toward a cluster of boulders shaped by centuries of wind. He moved quickly, a ghost against the white, using terrain like a second skin. His breath steamed around him, but he kept it controlled. Another shot rang out farther left this time, closer to the riverbed. 2 shooters. Maybe more. Silas pressed his back to the rock. His heartbeat slowed. His mind sharpened. All right, he breathed. Let's figure out your pattern. He peeked over the ridge. 2 heat signatures moved through the trees. One cautious and deliberate, the other scanning, flanking. They were coming closer. And then, a third heat signature appeared behind them, not moving like the others, not human. Silas blinked. A wolf. A large one, weaving between trees. And behind the wolf, an even larger figure, a man, broad, heavy, slow, carrying something long and metallic across his shoulder like a hunter returning home. Silas's stomach tightened. A tranquilizer rifle. That meant something worse than death was on the table. Capture, transport, torture. He shifted focus. The 2 nearest shooters were now 50 yards from the cabin, trying to get angles. Silas steadied his breath. One chance. He waited until the first shooter crossed the clearing, then fired. The man dropped instantly, snow exploding around him. The second shouted something in a foreign language, Slavic by the sound, and ducked behind a stump. Silas fired again. Missed by an inch. The shooter sprinted for new cover. Silas moved. Snow flew beneath his boots as he climbed the ridge. The cold clawed at his lungs. The adrenaline burned hot under his skin. His muscles remembered this rhythm, the deadly ballet of hunter and hunted. Behind him, the cabin remained silent. Elena, the dog. He needed to end this fast. Contact. The second shooter emerged suddenly from the left, firing a shotgun blast that shattered a tree trunk near Silas's shoulder. Splinters cut across his cheek. Silas ducked, rolled, came up firing. His shot hit the man's leg, sending him crashing into the snow. The man screamed, dropped his gun, and fumbled for a radio. Silas sprinted through the drift and slammed into him, knocking the device away. The man threw a punch trained, tight, controlled. Silas blocked, countered, grabbed the man's coat and shoved him into the snowbank. The man lunged for a knife. Silas caught his wrist and twisted until bone cracked. The man screamed again. Silas pressed his forearm against the attacker's throat. "Who sent you?" he growled. The man spat blood at him. Volkov. The name dropped like a stone in Silas's stomach. The woman had been right. This wasn't random. This wasn't small. This was organized crime on a level that didn't leave survivors. Behind Silas, a twig snapped. He turned too late. A third man emerged from behind a fallen pine, swinging the butt of a rifle like a hammer. The blow cracked into Silas's shoulder, dropping him to one knee. He rolled just before the second hit snow exploding beside him. The man advanced, raising the rifle to fire point blank. Silas lunged forward, grabbing the barrel, forcing it upward. The shot fired into the sky. Silas drove an elbow into the attacker's ribs, then slammed his knee into the man's thigh. The attacker staggered. Silas tackled him into the snow, grabbed a fistful of coat, and smashed his head against the frozen ground until the body went limp. He rose, breath heavy, shoulder throbbing. That was 3. The wolf howled in the distance, and the fourth figure, the broad man with the tranquilizer rifle, stepped into view at the tree line. Silas lifted his rifle. The man didn't flinch. He simply smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't human warmth at all. He shouted across the clearing, voice deep, confident, accented. "You keep what isn't yours, Kincaid." Silas stiffened. He knew Silas's name. The man stepped closer, boots crunching in the snow. "Hand over the prosecutor and the dog," he said, "and you walk away alive." Silas's grip tightened around the rifle. Prosecutor. So Elena wasn't just law enforcement, she was high level, important enough to send a private kill team. The man raised the tranquilizer rifle slowly. "You have 10 seconds. Silas didn't waste a single one. He ducked behind the boulder the moment the man fired. The heavy tranquilizer dart streaked past, thudding into the snow inches from Silas's arm. He rolled, sprinted across the clearing, and dove behind a fallen spruce. The man laughed a deep, booming sound. "You can't hide from me, Kincaid. I know every inch of these woods." Silas breathed hard, mind racing. He needed to get back to the cabin. He needed to protect Elena. But the broad man, clearly the leader, stood directly between him and his home. The wolf padded beside him now, yellow eyes fixed on Silas's position. The man scratched behind the wolf's ear. "Go." The wolf darted forward. Silas cursed under his breath. He pulled a flare from his belt and struck it, the bright red burning through the snow glare. The wolf lunged. Silas whipped the flare in a wide arc, the heat shocking the animal, forcing it to veer off. It snarled, retreating briefly, but the man laughed again. "You're smart, but not smart enough." He fired another tranquilizer round. Silas dodged barely, the dart grazing his coat sleeve. One hit was enough to drop a bear. 2 would kill one. He had seconds to reposition. Silas sprinted for higher ground, the ridge behind his cabin. He slid between trees, boots digging into the icy slope. The wind howled again, as if the storm were trying to return. Below, the leader shouted something to the remaining men. Silas reached the top of the ridge and dropped behind a boulder, gasping. He had lost visual. He had lost time. But he had gained one advantage. The high ground gave him a view straight down to his cabin. His heart clenched. 3 armed figures were already advancing toward it. Elena, the dog, alone. Silas steadied the rifle, breath freezing in the air. "Not today," he whispered. He aimed. He fired. He didn't miss. One man dropped instantly. The other two dove for cover. Silas loaded the next round. A second figure rose. Silas fired again. A hit. Snow exploded red. The third man panicked and ran for the tree line. Silas fired. The man collapsed face first into the drift. Silas lowered the rifle with shaking breath. Then, a soft crunch behind him. He turned. Too late. The leader stood 10 feet away, rifle aimed. You should have taken the deal. Silas reached for his knife. A tranquilizer dart slammed into his side. Pain exploded. Heat spread like wildfire through his veins. His limbs went heavy. The leader stepped closer, boots crunching softly in the snow. Sleep, Kincaid. Silas tried to lift his rifle. His vision blurred. The world tilted. The last thing he heard was the man's voice, low and satisfied. By the time you wake up, she'll be gone. Silas fell backward into the snow consciousness, slipping away in waves of fire and ice. Silas drifted in and out of consciousness, sinking into a darkness thick as tar. Voices moved around him, muffled, distant, distorted like he was underwater. Boots crunching on snow. A mechanical click. A woman's choked cry. Then a voice deep and cold slicing through the haze. Take her. Leave the dog. Kill it if you have to. Silas fought to move. Fought to rise. Fought to wake. But the tranquilizer kept dragging him back down, drowning thoughts, slowing blood, freezing will. He heard metal scraping. A zip tie tightening. Elena's panicked breathing, sharp and terrified. Then a snarl, fierce and explosive. The dog. The Rottweiler lunged with everything he had left. Silas forced his eyes open through a blur of snow and shapes. The dog clamped onto the leg of one of the armed men, tearing through layers of ballistic fabric. The man screamed, stumbling back. Another attacker kicked the dog in the ribs, but the animal didn't let go. Didn't even blink, pulling, twisting, ripping. Eliminate the animal, someone shouted. Silas's vision flickered in and out. He could barely lift a finger, let alone move. The leader Volkov raised his tranquilizer rifle and aimed at the dog, smirking. We do this the easy way. He fired. The dart slammed into the dog's shoulder. The Rottweiler yelped a sound that stabbed straight through Silas's chest, but he didn't collapse. He didn't fall. He growled, a deep, primal sound, and lunged again. Volkov actually took a step back, surprised. Stubborn creature, he muttered. Fine. Kill it the hard way. One of his men lifted a pistol. Elena screamed. No. Silas tried to move, to stand, to crawl, to shout anything. Nothing responded. His muscles refused him. The tranquilizer felt like fire and concrete mixed in his veins. The dog launched once more, teeth bared. The shot fired. Snow burst in a white cloud. Silas's vision snapped white. For a terrifying second, he thought the bullet had hit the dog. But when the air cleared, the Rottweiler still stood. The bullet had missed. Even in tranquilized stupor, Silas recognized the truth. The shooter had hesitated. Dogs like this, war-bred, loyal, intelligent, were rare, beautiful, hard to kill. And for that tiniest fraction of a second, that hesitation saved the dog's life. Volkov snarled. Do it properly. Shoot again. The gun lifted. But suddenly, another shout erupted from the tree line. Contact right. Gunfire cracked across the clearing, not from Volkov's men, but from somewhere deeper in the forest. Close. Controlled. Tactical. Volkov whipped his head toward the noise. His men scrambled, taking defensive positions. Silas's muddled brain strained to process it. More enemies, a rival group, a patrol. Anyone insane enough to operate out here? Volkov growled under his breath. Damn it. Grab the woman and move. Leave the rest. Two men hoisted Elena by her arms. She fought back, kicking, screaming, but her injuries made her weak. They dragged her toward the trees. The dog, despite the tranquilizer dart lodged in his shoulder, lunged again, teeth bared, eyes burning. A rifle butt smashed into his side, knocking him down. He collapsed, muscles twitching, vision swimming. Volkov turned toward Silas. You had potential, he said almost regretfully, but you picked the wrong side. He raised the tranquilizer rifle again, this time with a lethal dart. Silas tried to lift a hand. He couldn't. He couldn't save Elena. He couldn't save the dog. He couldn't even save himself. All he could do was watch through half-closed eyes as Volkov stepped closer. A branch snapped behind them. A shout roared through the clearing. Gunshots erupted from the ridge, rapid, precise. Volkov dove behind a tree. A bullet tore through the snow where his head had been. Mauve, he barked. His men dropped smoke canisters and fell back, dragging Elena with them. Thick white columns billowed upward, blending with the cold morning air, cloaking their escape. The dog tried to stand, legs shaking, chest heaving, but collapsed again, muscles refusing him. Silas's vision dimmed further. Shapes blurred. Sounds faded. The last thing he saw before darkness swallowed him was Elena's hand reaching out through the smoke, fingers trembling, desperate before disappearing completely. And then, everything went black. The cold wakes him. Silas didn't know how long he was out. Minutes, hours. It could have been both. When consciousness returned, it came like shards of ice stabbing into his skull. His limbs felt like soaked sandbags. His eyelids were glued shut. His breath shook in his chest. He lay half buried in snow. The storm clouds were breaking overhead, sunlight filtering in thin, pale threads. A weak whine reached his ears. Silas's eyes opened with effort. The Rottweiler alive lay a few feet away, dragging his torso forward with trembling paws, trying to reach him. The dog collapsed halfway. Silas's heart clenched. "Hey," he rasped, voice destroyed. "Easy. I'm here." He forced his arm to move. It took everything he had. He crawled toward the dog inch by inch, until he could put a hand on the animal's neck. The Rottweiler licked his finger, weak, uncoordinated but alive. "That's it," Silas whispered. "Stay with me. Just stay." His body felt foreign, his thoughts heavy, his pulse slow. But the worst of the tranquilizer was burning off. Barely. He could move again, not well, not fast, but enough. He sat up slowly, clutching his ribs. The world tilted sickeningly. He waited for the nausea to steady, blinking hard. His head throbbed. His vision doubled. He tasted metal in his mouth, but Elena's screams still echoed in his ears. Volkov had taken her, and that meant she had hours, maybe less. Silas forced himself onto one knee. His breathing hitched. His muscles twitched. The cold carved into him like knives. But he rose. Because Elena didn't need a man lying in the snow. She needed a soldier, the damage. Silas staggered toward the cabin. The door hung half open, splintered by a boot. Inside, shelves were overturned. Supplies smashed. Blood droplets stained the floor, not enough to be fatal, but enough to show she'd fought back. A radio lay broken near the fireplace. Volkov's men were thorough. Silas grabbed the edge of a table as dizziness washed over him again. The dog crawled inside behind him, whimpering. Silas lifted him barely onto a blanket near the fire. A tranquilizer droline dripped from the dog's muzzle. "Hang in there, buddy." Silas pulled the dart from the dog's shoulder and pressed a cloth to stop the bleeding. "You did good. You did damn good." He stumbled to the sink and splashed icy water on his face. Memories returned in pieces. Volkov's voice. Elena screaming. The wolf. Gunfire in the trees. And then, those other shots. Not Volkov's team. Someone else was involved. Silas leaned on the counter, breathing hard. He needed to move. He needed weapons. He needed a trail. He needed to ignore the pain ripping through his body and the fire still burning his veins. He strapped on his gear knives, spare ammo, thermal monocular, water, med kit. He slung his rifle across his back, then grabbed a second to attach to his pack. But when he reached the door, the dog tried to stand. He staggered, legs trembling violently, but refused to stay down. Silas knelt beside him. "Not this time," he whispered. "You're too injured." The dog growled weakly, refusing the command. Silas stared into those determined brown eyes, tired, drugged, pained, but burning with the same fire Silas felt. The dog wasn't asking permission. He was declaring he wasn't staying behind. Silas sighed, nodding once. "All right, but stay close." He tightened the dog's improvised chest wrap and packed an emergency shot of adrenaline into his pouch. The dog leaned against him for balance but stayed upright. Silas took one last look around the cabin, broken, ransacked, violated, and stepped outside into the freezing air. Snow glittered in every direction, and just beyond the tree line, footprints, lots of them, leading north. Silas adjusted his rifle strap. "Hang on, Elena," he whispered. He took a step forward. The dog followed, Together, limping but unbroken, they disappeared into the forest, following the trail of men who had made a deadly mistake. They took something Silas Kincaid was willing to kill, to protect. The trail cut through the snow like a scar-deep footprints, heavy gear marks, and the straight, dragging furrows of someone being pulled. Elena. Silas's jaw tightened. He moved fast through the trees, each breath burning in his lungs, each step stabbing pain through his still drugged muscles. The world swayed occasionally, but he forced everything into focus. There was no room for weakness now, no room for hesitation. Not while Elena was in enemy hands. The Rottweiler limped beside him, though the dog's body still trembled from the tranquilizer. Every few minutes, he stumbled, but every time, he stood back up, stubborn as bedrock. Silas glanced at him. Still with me? The dog huffed a small sound. Tired but determined. Good, Silas said. Let's keep moving. The forest thinned as they descended into the valley below the ridge. Morning light glinted off frost-coated branches, turning the world into a glass cathedral. But beauty didn't matter here. What mattered was the trail. And the trail was fresh. Boot prints. 5 sets all-armed men. The dragging mark Elena's boots. And something else. Silas crouched and brushed snow away from a deeper imprint. The print was wide, heavy, the toe shape squared, military-grade cold-weather boots. Volkov's. Silas stared down the trail. I'm coming for you, he muttered. The dog growled softly, as if agreeing. Signs of a struggle. Half an hour later, the trail dipped into a narrow corridor between 2 towering rock faces. Wind funneled through the passage like a blade, slicing at exposed skin. But signs of violence lay everywhere. Blood droplets, small torn fibers of Elena's jacket, a crushed radio, and a broken tranquilizer dart in the snow. Silas lifted the dart. Empty. They'd tried to sedate her again. Maybe she fought. Maybe she resisted long enough to slow them. Silas's jaw clenched. She's tougher than she looks, he whispered. The dog nudged at something in the snow. Silas brushed away frost, revealing a twisted metal clasp. A seatbelt buckle. Elena must have ripped it off her restraints. She was leaving a trail on purpose. Smart, precise, a prosecutor with survival instincts. Silas moved forward, energy rising in his chest. If she was still resisting this hard, she was still alive. The Valley of Echoes. The trail opened into a vast frozen valley, a basin carved by glaciers long before any human walked the land. Snow stretched undisturbed for miles, broken only by jagged stone pillars that jutted out like the ribs of a long-dead beast. Silas stopped at the valley's edge. Tracks spread out. Footprints split into multiple directions, a tactical spread. Volkov wasn't just moving. He was covering his retreat. Silas crouched, analyzing the patterns. 2 men dragged Elena forward. Another man walked parallel at a distance, flank security. Another took a high-ridge position. Volkov himself walked at the rear, heavy steps, steady, leaving deeper prints. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't afraid. He believed Silas was either dead or too weak to follow. Silas straightened. Wrong on both counts. The dog barked once, weak but sharp. Silas ran his hand across the dog's head. You smell him too. Huh? Let's go. They crossed the valley, weaving between stone formations. The silence felt wrong, too still, too expectant. Silas slowed, eyes narrowing. Something was off. Too many tracks spread out, too many decoys, too wide a trail. Volkov was too smart to leave this big a footprint, unless ambush. Silas grabbed the dog and dove behind a large stone pillar, just as a rifle shot echoed across the valley. Snow erupted where Silas had been standing seconds earlier. He rolled, pulling the dog close, and flattened against the stone. Another shot cracked. Closer, sniper. From the ridge above, Silas raised his monocular cautiously around the edge of the rock. A faint heat signature prone, steady just beyond a boulder overlooking the valley. Silas cursed under his breath. Volkov had left someone behind to slow him down. Of course he did. Silas stowed the monocular. He steadied his breathing, planned the angle. He needed to circle wide, use stone formations as cover and flank high. But the dog, Silas looked down. The dog was shaking, exhausted, yet stood ready, waiting for a signal. You stay, Silas whispered. The dog growled, refusing. Silas stared into his eyes. This is different, he said quietly. This isn't close combat. It's a sniper. You rush out there. You die. The dog's ears flattened. A soft whine. Silas placed a hand on his neck. Stay. That's an order. The dog reluctantly lowered himself behind the pillar. Silas slipped out the opposite side and disappeared into the valley's maze. The stalker on the ridge. The climb up the ridge was brutal. Steep. Icy. Exposed. And every movement risked, exposing his silhouette against the sky. He moved slow, methodical, calculating every step. His muscles burned. His pulse pounded in his ears. He could hear the sniper adjusting position, faint clicks, scanning for movement. Silas crept along a narrow ledge, digging fingers into frozen cracks. One slip and he'd fall 30 feet to jagged stone. Minutes stretched into eternity. Finally, he reached the crest. The sniper lay ahead, camouflaged by a snow cloak, rifle steady, eye glued to the scope, scanning the valley for movement. Silas lowered his rifle. He needed silence, speed, precision. He crept closer. 20 feet. 10. 5. He lunged. The sniper whipped around too late. Silas crashed into him, knocking the rifle aside. The two men rolled down a shallow slope, wrestling in the snow. The sniper clawed at Silas's face, reaching for a sidearm. Silas slammed his elbow into the man's jaw. The man kicked hard, scrambling backward, drawing a knife. Silas blocked the stab, twisted the wrist, and drove the man's own momentum into the ground, snapping bone. The knife fell. Silas grabbed it, held it at the man's throat. Where are they taking her? Silas growled. The sniper spat blood. You won't reach them. Silas pressed harder. Where? The sniper's lips curled into a faint smile. To the mem. A sharp crack split the air. The sniper's eyes widened, then went still. A bullet hole appeared between them. Silas jerked back, scanning the ridge. Someone else had shot him. Not a warning. A cleanup. Silas dropped behind a rock as another bullet tore through the snow beside him. Volkov wasn't just covering his trail. He was wiping it clean. Silas grabbed the fallen sniper's rifle and slid down the backside of the ridge, heart pounding. He hit the valley floor in a controlled fall, snow spraying around him. The dog ran to him immediately. Silas patted his side. I'm fine. He wasn't. The shot that killed the sniper had come from far east, meaning Volkov had a secondary team covering escape routes. This was getting worse by the minute. The mountains, shadow. The trail funneled into a narrow path, hugging the side of a steep mountain, the northern ridge of Blackwood. The wind screamed across the cliff face, sending sheets of powder swirling. The drag marks from Elena's boots were clearer now, deeper, more frantic. Silas quickened his pace, following the path upward. The dog kept close, occasionally slipping but always recovering. Halfway up the mountain, Silas spotted something hanging from a branch, a scrap of fabric. He plucked it gently. Dark blue, from Elena's jacket. His chest tightened. She's still fighting, he murmured. The dog barked once, sensing the shift in Silas's energy. They continued upward until the path widened into a rocky plateau, overlooking a frozen river far below. Footprints converged here. Volkov's team had stopped, maybe rested, maybe regrouped. Silas crouched and traced the prints with his fingertips. Then he found something else. A single boot print smaller. Elena's foot, pointing north. She had briefly stood here, facing the direction she was being taken, and she had kicked her heel into the snow deliberately, creating a small, crooked cross. A marker. A signal. For him. Silas swallowed hard. His vision blurred for a second, not from pain, but from something deeper. Respect, admiration, connection. She trusts me, he whispered. The dog barked again, sharper. Silas rose. The trail now led toward a shape on the horizon, a massive abandoned mining outpost built into the mountainside. Dozens of old steel structures, towers half collapsed, loading cranes frozen in time, miners' barracks weathered by decades of storms. Silas exhaled slowly. I know this place. Blackwood Mine. Shut down 20 years ago. Isolated. Forgotten. Perfect for interrogation. Torture. Disappearance. Silas gripped his rifle. Of course you'd take her there, Volkov. The dog stood beside him, eyes locked on the same destination. Silas placed a hand on his head. This ends there, he murmured. One way or another. He scanned the valley one last time, Volkov had a head start, a full tactical team, positions fortified by terrain. But Silas had two things they didn't: the wilderness in his blood, and a wounded, furious Rottweiler who refused to die. Silas took a long breath, feeling the cold carve into his lungs, fueling him. Let's go. Together, man and dog began the ascent toward the abandoned mine, toward the enemy, toward the heart of the storm that had been waiting for Silas Kincaid to return to war. Blackwood Mine rose out of the mountainside like the skeleton of some ancient beast. Metal towers leaned at broken angles. Rust ate through old conveyor lines. Collapsed tunnels gaped like open jaws filled with darkness. Wind whistled through bent steel beams, carrying a low, hollow moan that sounded almost alive. No one had worked here in 20 years. But someone was here now. Silas crouched behind a snowdrift at the ridge's edge, studying the structure below through his monocular. The dog lay beside him, chest rising and falling quickly, still recovering, but alert. From above, the mine looked abandoned, silent, dead, but subtle signs betrayed the truth. Fresh footprints in the snow, heat signatures flickering behind broken panels, a faint hum of a generator under the wind, and a figure moving along an aerial walkway, carrying a long rifle. Silas scanned again. 4 guards outside, 2 patrolling the lower platforms, 1 on the roof of the loading bay, 1 stationed at the central tower with binoculars. Inside, harder to tell, but Elena would be there, and she didn't have long. Silas lowered the monocular. "You ready?" he asked softly. The dog let out a quiet but decisive rumble. "Good." Silas moved. The approach. He descended the slope, slowly, using fallen beams and snow mounds for cover. The dog followed closely, stepping only where Silas stepped, mirroring his movements with uncanny discipline. At the bottom, Silas paused behind a collapsed ore cart. He waited, listening. Wind, metal creaking, a guard coughing somewhere on the upper level. Clear. He moved again. The 2 lower guards were the first obstacle, both positioned near the broken rail tracks. One smoked lazily, breath fogging into the cold. The other tapped a radio, complaining about the signal. Silas studied them. Weak discipline, poor awareness, overconfident. Good. He signaled the dog to stay. Then he slipped through the shadows. The first guard barely saw him. A hand wrapped around his mouth. An arm locked his throat. And seconds later, his body slumped silently into the snow. The second guard turned instinctively, sensing movement, but Silas was already behind him. A swift strike to the temple. The man dropped like a stone. Silas dragged their bodies behind rusted machinery and returned for the dog. "Come," he whispered. The dog padded silently beside him. They approached the loading bay, where the third guard patrolled a long walkway above. Silas waited for the man to turn his back, then climbed the support beams, fingers freezing on cold steel, until he reached the platform edge. He pulled himself over quietly. The guard walked toward him, unaware. Silas waited, silent, still. When the guard was close enough, Silas hooked his arm around his neck, twisted, and dragged him down behind a stack of metal crates. The struggle lasted seconds. Silas exhaled and signaled the dog again. 3 down, 1 more outside. He scanned the central tower. The last guard rotated slowly, binoculars scanning the valley, looking for Silas. He never thought to look behind. Silas scaled the tower's rear ladder, 1 rung at a time, careful not to make it creak. He reached the top just as the guard lowered the binoculars and checked his watch. Silas stepped out of the shadow. The guard turned startled, but Silas swept his legs and pinned him instantly, gripping his collar. "Where is she?" Silas hissed. The guard choked. "Middle shaft, Section C, please." Silas knocked him out cold. He rose, breathing hard. Elena was inside. The dog climbed the last few steps of the ladder, panting. Silas ruffled his neck. "Good job." He pointed to a broken vent leading into the mine interior. "That's our way in." Together, they slipped into the darkness. Inside the belly of the beast, the interior of Blackwood Mine felt like descending into another world. Rust, coal dust, frozen moisture clinging to every surface. A maze of tunnels and platforms, lit by dim industrial lamps, powered by a stolen generator. Echoes traveled strangely here, bouncing, stretching, warping, making it impossible to tell how far away anything really was. Silas stayed low, rifle ready. The dog's ears twitched constantly, tracking distant footsteps. They passed through an abandoned control room. down a stairwell corroded with frost, and into a long corridor where overhead pipes dripped with icy condensation. Then Silas heard it. A scream. Elena. Muffled. Strangled. But unmistakably hers. He moved faster. The corridor opened into a large chamber, once the main shaft hub. Now, it was a torture room. Spotlights hung from rigged frames. Tables were lined with restraints, old mining tools converted into crude interrogation instruments. At the far end, Elena was tied to a steel chair, wrists bound behind her, breath sharp, face bruised. 2 men stood beside her, and 1 man in front. Volkov. Broad. Calm. In control. He examined a small metal case on the table filled with syringes and vials of clear liquid. Last chance, Volkov said, voice smooth, almost conversational. You give me the names, prosecutor, and I let you die quickly. Elena spat blood onto the ground. Go to hell. Volkov chuckled. You first. He reached for a vial. Silas raised his rifle. But before he could fire, the dog growled softly, alerting him. Another guard stood hidden on an upper walkway, rifle aimed directly at the torture chamber. A sniper inside the mine. Silas froze. If he took the shot at Volkov, the sniper would shoot Elena. If he shot the sniper, Volkov would inject her. He needed a distraction. Something loud. Something disruptive. He glanced at a stack of old compressed gas canisters, near the wall, relics from the mine's operating days. If one ruptured, it would blow half the chamber open. He aimed slightly away from Volkov toward the canisters. The dog tensed. Silas exhaled. Fired. The bullet pierced the canister. A violent hiss erupted as pressure exploded outward. Men shouted. Lights flickered. Dust clouds filled the air. The mine chamber shook. Silas used the chaos, sprinting down the stairs into the room below. Volkov shouted, grabbing Elena, pulling her behind him. Find him. Kill him. Gunfire erupted in every direction. Silas dove behind an overturned mining cart. Bullets sparked against metal. Shards of rock rained down. The dog barked, weaving between cover. A streak of black and brown. The sniper on the upper walkway tried to reacquire his angle, but the dog leapt onto a support beam and lunged at the man's arm, throwing his aim off. The sniper fired wildly into the ceiling. Silas shot him once in the chest. The man fell from the walkway and hit the ground hard. 3 guards rushed Silas at once. Silas rolled, fired twice, hitting one in the leg, another in the shoulder. The third tackled him into the ground. Silas slammed his elbow into the man's throat, grabbed his coat, and flipped him over his shoulder. The dog tore into the man's arm as he hit the ground. Silas rose just in time to see Volkov dragging Elena toward a reinforced door deeper into the mine. Elena, Silas shouted. Her head snapped up. Silas. Volkov yanked her harder. Silas sprinted after them, firing, but Volkov shoved Elena in front of him, using her as a shield. Silas was forced to hold his shot. Volkov kicked open the door and dragged her inside. The steel door slammed shut. Locked. Silas reached it seconds later and slammed his fist against the metal. Elena. From inside, her voice echoed faintly. Silas, don't. Then a clang. And silence. The dog barked at the door, claws scraping the metal. Silas pressed his forehead against it, panting hard. Volkov hadn't retreated. He had moved to the final chamber, the deepest part of the mine, the old elevator shaft. A dead end, but perfect for a last stand. Silas stepped back, raising his rifle, examining the structure. He could break through, but he needed force, angle, timing. He turned to the dog. Let's finish this. The dog growled. Silas aimed at the door's hinge. Fired. The metal buckled. Again. A second shot. The hinge snapped. He kicked the door once hard. It swung inward. And Silas stepped into the dim corridor leading to the final chamber. Volkov had nowhere left to run. The corridor narrowed into a steep descent lit only by flickering emergency lamps, relics from the mine's final days. Cold air bled from the darkness below, carrying the scent of rust, oil, and something older, something dead. Silas's boots splashed through shallow puddles left by decades of condensation. The dog walked beside him, limping, but alert ears pricked, hackles rising. They reached the bottom of the descent, and there it stood, the old elevator chamber, a cavern carved out by dynamite and time. Steel beams supported a hollow vertical shaft that plunged into blackness. Cables hung like skeletal vines. A rickety platformance used to haul ore dangled halfway down the shaft, swinging gently in a draft. Floodlights clearly new had been installed around the chamber. Their harsh glow cast sharp shadows across the metal grating. And on the far side of the chamber, Volkov stood with Elena in front of him. Her wrists were still bound, but she was standing, barely. Her knees trembled. Blood streaked her cheek, but her eyes burned with the same fire as before. Volkov held a heavy pistol in one hand, the other gripping Elena's shoulder. He saw Silas enter. A slow smile unfolded across his face. Well, Volkov murmured. The mountain man lives, Silas said, nutting just leveled his rifle. Volkov nudged Elena slightly forward, using her like a body shield. I wouldn't, he said. Not unless you want her brains on the wall. Silas's finger tightened on the trigger, but he held. Volkov laughed, a deep, rolling sound that bounced off the steel walls. You're predictable, Kincaid. Merciful, loyal, noble. He tilted Elena's chin. That's why people like her die around men like you. Elena spat at him. Volkov shoved her to her knees. Temper, he hissed. The dog growled for rising, body trembling with restrained fury. Volkov glanced at him. And this animal, he scoffed. I should have killed it the moment it bit me. Silas stepped forward. Let her go. Volkov raised the pistol. Or what? You'll shoot me. No, you won't. You don't want to risk her life. Silas's voice dropped to a low, steady growl. You've got that wrong. Volkov's smile faded slightly. Silas continued, I'm not here to arrest you. I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to end this. Volkov's eyes narrowed. Elena is innocent, Silas said. The dog is innocent. But you, he took another step. You're already dead. Volkov jerked Elena upright and shoved her backward, using her momentum as a distraction. He opened fire at Silas. Silas dove for cover behind a steel support beam. Bullets sparked off metal. Echoes roared through the chamber. Elena, knocked off balance, stumbled toward the elevator shaft, edge arms tied behind her, unable to catch herself. She slipped. Her heel slid off the grate. She fell. No, Silas shouted. But at the last second, the dog lunged, clamping his teeth into the sleeve of her jacket, dragging her back from the abyss. Elena collapsed onto the grated floor, gasping. Volkov cursed and fired at the dog. Silas fired back. The bullet tore through Volkov's arm, making him drop the pistol. Volkov snarled like a wounded bear, clutching the wound. You think you've won? He spat. You think bullets will stop me? He reached behind him, grabbing a long steel pry bar from an equipment table. Silas emerged from cover, rifle raised. But before he could fire again, Volkov hurled something small and metallic toward him. A grenade. Down, Silas shouted. He grabbed the dog and dove behind a steel crate. The explosion rocked the chamber. Dust, smoke, shrapnel. The old mine groaned, ancient beams shifting under the shockwave. Silas coughed hard, ears ringing, vision blurring from the concussion. He pushed himself upright and saw Volkov dragging Elena toward the elevator platform, which hung suspended over the shaft. The cable creaked ominously under the weight. Elena fought weak but fierce, kicking and twisting. Volkov slammed her against the control box. You will tell me what I need, he growled. Before or after I break your legs. Your choice. Silas staggered to his feet, gripping his rifle. The dog barked sharply beside him, injured but refusing to stop. Move, Silas whispered to him. Stay low. They advanced. Volkov spotted them and kicked the control lever. The platform jerked, then began to descend into the black pit below. Silas broke into a sprint. Elena looked eyes wide, desperate. Silas reached the edge of the platform just as it dropped 5 feet lower. The gap widened in too far to jump safely. He fired downward at the cable's butt. Volkov grabbed Elena and used her as cover again. Try it, soldier, Volkov taunted. See if you can shoot through her. Silas swore under his breath. The platform descended further. He needed another angle. His eyes locked on the maintenance ladder bolted to the side of the shaft. A narrow, rusted path descending deep into the darkness. It'll hold, Silas muttered. He hoped. He slung his rifle and grabbed the ladder, climbing downward as fast as his battered body allowed. The dog barked and ran along the upper walkway, searching for a path. Metal groaned around him. Dust rained down. Halfway down, Silas swung onto a horizontal support beam and dropped onto a narrow ledge running along the shaft wall. He looked up. Elena and Volkov were now 30 feet above him, descending toward the lower level. He looked down. Another 50 feet of darkness. If he slipped, he'd fall forever. Silas took a breath, started moving sideways, carefully, quietly, eyeing the platform above. Volkov leaned over the railing, saw him, and fired. Bullets sparked against the wall near Silas's head. Silas flattened himself against the shaft, gripping a pipe with one hand, returning fire with the other. The two exchanged shots over the yawning void. Metal screamed. Sparks rained. Silas's pulse hammered in his skull. Finally, Volkov growled, threw his empty magazine aside, and seized Elena again. "You first," he snarled. He shoved her toward the front of the platform, toward a secondary ladder that led even deeper into the mine. Elena resisted, kicking backward. Volkov backhanded her. Silas's anger surged. "Let her go," he shouted. Volkov laughed. "Come take her." The platform thudded onto the lower level, the last intact landing before the shaft plunged into pure darkness. Volkov dragged Elena off the platform and into a chamber, lit by a single flickering lamp. Silas climbed onto the same level seconds later, rifle raised. The chamber was an open steel room with catwalks and broken conveyor belts. Elena lay on the ground, dazed. Volkov stood 10 feet away, now without a gun, without a shield, without a barrier. Just a 6'4" monster with a steel pry bar in one hand, and murder in his eyes. Silas stepped into the room. Volkov slammed the pry bar against a beam, sparks flying. "A soldier versus a butcher," Volkov said. "Let's see which life makes the stronger man." Silas dropped the empty rifle, raised his fists. "This ends now." Volkov charged. Their bodies collided like two boulders slamming into each other. Silas struck first an elbow to the jaw, a knee to the ribs. Volkov absorbed the blows and swung the pry bar. Silas ducked. The bar smashed into a support beam, cracking it. The mine trembled. Dust billowed from the ceiling. Volkov swung again. Silas blocked with his forearm pain, exploding, but managed to twist the bar away, sending it skidding across the floor. Volkov roared and grabbed Silas by the throat, slamming him into a steel column. Silas choked, gasping for air. Volkov's grip tightened. "You are nothing," he snarled. "A recluse, a broken soldier hiding in the snow." Silas rasped back. "And you're just another dead man talking." He drove his knee into Volkov's stomach once, twice, 3 times. Volkov staggered. Silas followed with a brutal right hook, then another, then a hammer fist to the base of the skull. Volkov fell to one knee. Silas reached for him, but Volkov surged up, grabbing Silas and hurling him backward. Silas crashed onto the grating, the wind knocked out of him. Volkov seized the edge of the steel pry bar and lifted it overhead like an executioner. Elena, still bound, shouted, "Silas, move." Silas rolled just as the bar slammed into the floor beside him, denting steel like soft clay. He kicked upward, hitting Volkov in the knee. The joint buckled. Silas scrambled to his feet, grabbed Volkov's wrist, and twisted, forcing the pry bar free. The two men grapple draw, strength versus precision. Silas ducked under a wild punch, stepped inside Volkov's shoulder, and drove the pry bar into his ribs. Volkov howled. Silas struck again. Volkov landed a brutal headbutt that sent blood streaming from Silas's nose. The dog suddenly appeared at the chamber entrances, snarling, barking, distracting Volkov. Silas seized the opening. He slammed the pry bar into Volkov's throat. Once, twice, 3 times. Volkov collapsed backward, crashing onto the steel grating. He gasped, choking, clutching his crushed windpipe. Silas stood over him, bleeding, shaking, barely on his feet. Volkov wheezed out, "She dies with me." He reached toward a detonator strapped to his belt. Silas's eyes widened. He lunged, grabbed Volkov's wrist, and slammed it against the floor. Volkov's fingers spasmed. The detonator clattered away. Silas kicked it across the chamber. Volkov, in a final desperate motion, grabbed Silas's coat and pulled him close, trying to drag him into the shaft behind them. Silas braced and swung the pry bar one last time. It connected with Volkov's temple. The impact echoed like a bell inside the mine. Volkov's grip loosened. His eyes rolled back. His body toppled to the side and slid toward the shaft. Silas lunged to grab him, but stopped. Some deaths a man earned. Volkov's body disappeared into the darkness below. A long, hollow silence followed. Elena stared at Silas, breath trembling. Is it over? Silas bent down, panting, blood dripping from his chin. No, he said. Not yet. A deep rumble shook the chamber. The mine was collapsing. The chamber trembled under Silas's boots. A deep, rolling vibration rising from the bowels of the mine. Ancient beams groaned. Dust rained in thick sheets. Loose bolts clattered across the steel grating. The mine was dying. Silas staggered, steadying himself on a support column. Elena, still bound, lay on the floor nearby, dazed but conscious. Her eyes widened. What's happening? Silas looked upward. Cracks spiderwebbed across the ceiling. Chunks of rock dropped like hailstones. It's collapsing, he said. Volkov's grenade destabilized the shaft. A sharp metallic screech echoed overhead. The elevator cables. They were snapping, one by one. Elena tried to push herself upright, failed, nearly sliding toward the open shaft again. Silas rushed to her, grabbing her under the shoulders and pulling her away from the edge. We have to move, he said. Now. The dog limped to her side, nudging her arm, whimpering softly. Elena smiled weakly. I'm okay, buddy. But the dog kept pushing. Urgent. Afraid. Knowing the mountain was waking up in violence. Silas cut the rope binding her wrists with a jagged piece of steel from the floor. Elena winced as blood rushed back into her hands. Silas pulled her into his arms. Can you walk? I'll try. She stood, legs trembling badly. The moment she took a step, her knee buckled. Silas caught her again. I've got you. The mine roared overhead, a thunderous crack ripping through the chamber. A massive steel beam snapped free from the ceiling. Silas threw himself over Elena. Boom. The beam slammed into the floor inches away. Sparks exploding like fireworks. Elena gasped. Silas shielded her with his body as dust engulfed them. The dog barked, wildly circling, trying to pull them toward the exit corridor. Silas rose to his feet and scooped Elena up in his arms. Hold on. She wrapped her arms around his neck as he began moving. The run through hell. The corridor outside the shaft chamber had already begun folding in on itself. Pipes ruptured overhead, shooting icy vapor and steam across the walls. Metal groaned like a dying beast. Silas ran Elena in his arms, the dog at his heel. Behind them, the chamber collapsed with a deafening implosion. The platform, the shaft walls, the rails, all swallowed into darkness. A wave of dust chased them like a sandstorm. Faster, Elena whispered, voice shaking. I'm trying. The dog barked once in warning. A support column ahead snapped. Silas skidded, lungs burning, and dove sideways as the column collapsed across the corridor. Steel slammed the ground so hard the floor buckled. Silas rolled, still cradling Elena, barely clearing the impact zone. He scrambled back to his feet and kept running. Elena clutched his jacket. You can't carry me the whole way. Watch me. Another tremor, another boom. Ceiling plates fell like guillotines. Silas weaved through them, dodging left and right, instincts firing with soldier precision. But the corridor ahead narrowed. Too much debris. Not enough space. He slid to a stop. Trapped. No, Elena said, shaking her head. There has to be another way. Silas scanned the walls. Old miner markings. Color-coded arrows. One symbol caught his eye. A faded yellow triangle. Ventilation shaft, Silas muttered. Emergency exit route. Elena looked at the massive steel ventilation grate. It's sealed. Not for long. Silas lowered her gently. Stay behind me. He braced his foot against the wall and tore at the grate. Rust cracked. Bolts snapped. Metal screamed. The dog barked urgently. Another ceiling beam was about to fall. Silas yanked the grate with everything he had. Krang. It ripped open. A narrow passage stretched upward at a steep angle, half collapsed but passable. Go. Silas shoved Elena inside. Climb. Don't stop. She began pulling herself upward, using her elbows and knees, crawling like a soldier under fire. The dog scrambled behind her, claws scraping metal. Silas was last. He pulled himself inside, and the corridor behind them caved in entirely, sealing the shaft with a mountain of rock. Darkness swallowed them. The crawl, the ventilation shaft was cramped and suffocating, barely large enough for one person at a time. Elena moved ahead, panting hard, pushing through debris. The dog squeezed behind her, whimpering with each movement, but refusing to stop. Silas crawled last, dragging himself upward through the narrow tunnel, his injured shoulder screaming with every pull. Somewhere above, wind whistled faintly through the metal walls. Almost there, Silas said. Keep going. But the shaft suddenly shook. A loud metallic bang echoed through the tunnel. What was that? Elena whispered. Silas's eyes widened. The secondary support ring. It snapped. The tunnel dipped. Not enough to drop them, but enough to wedge the dog between crumpled metal. He yelped. Elena, wait, Silas barked. She froze. Silas crawled downward and reached the dog. His hind leg was pinned under a twisted bar of metal. Silas braced his shoulder and pulled. The metal didn't move. The dog cried, pawing at Silas's arm helplessly. Come on. Come on. Silas growled through clenched teeth. Elena crawled backward, tears forming in her eyes. Silas, we can't leave him. I'm not. He tried again. Muscles burning. Vision blurring. Blood dripping from a cut on his forehead. He roared, pulled, and the metal bar finally bent. The dog slid free, collapsing against Silas's chest. Silas wrapped an arm around him. Good boy. Good boy. Another distant collapse shook the tunnel. We have to move, Elena said. Silas shoved the dog upward. Elena grabbed him and pulled him along. Silas crawled after them, every breath sharper, every movement slower. Finally, a faint glow appeared ahead. Daylight. The exit. They reached the top of the ventilation shaft. A rusted emergency hatch sat half buried in snow and ice. Silas slammed his shoulder into it. It didn't budge. He tried again. A crack formed. He kicked it, over and over. Elena pushed beside him, using what little strength she had left. The hinge groaned, screamed, and finally snapped open. A blast of freezing wind rushed into the tunnel. Silas climbed through first, dragging himself into a snowy mountainside. They had emerged near a cliff ledge overlooking the valley. Elena crawled out next, collapsing onto the snow. The dog followed, curling against her. Silas looked behind. The mine's main support entrance was shaking violently. The mountainside heaved. Then, boom, a final, earth-shattering collapse consumed the entire structure. The Blackwood mine imploded, sending a plume of dust, rock, and smoke into the sky. Elena flinched, burying her face in Silas's coat. Silas wrapped an arm around her, staring at the destruction. It's over, he said quietly. Elena's voice trembled. You saved us. Silas shook his head. You saved yourself. I just followed. The dog barked faintly. Silas bowed his head and rubbed behind his ear. You saved all of us, he murmured to the dog. The long cold walk. The blizzard had returned, snow swirling violently around them. Elena shivered uncontrollably. Silas removed his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. You'll freeze if you give me that, she protested weakly. I've been colder. He lifted her again. Her head rested against his chest, exhausted, half-conscious. The dog walked ahead, limping but determined, leading the way through the storm. The trek back to the cabin would take hours, but Silas moved forward anyway, one step at a time, fighting the wind, holding Elena close. Silas, she whispered softly. Yeah? You didn't have to come for me. You didn't even know me. He looked down at her. Yes, he said. I did. Elena's eyes softened. Why? He paused. Snow battered his face. Wind howled around them, but his voice was steady. Because nobody gets left behind. Elena closed her eyes, tears freezing on her lashes. Silas kept walking, strong, unbroken, unstoppable, carrying her toward safety, toward warmth, toward the one place where the nightmare couldn't follow. Behind them, the mine burned out its last breath. Ahead of them, somewhere through the storm, was the cabin, and the first quiet moment in days. The cabin emerged through the white curtain of the blizzard like an old memory, blurred, battered, barely visible, but still standing. Silas's legs nearly buckled when he reached the front steps. Not from weakness, not from pain, but from the sudden force of relief. The storm howled behind him, trying to drag them back into the dark. But he pushed inside, kicking the door shut with his heel. Warmth greeted them immediately. What little heat remained from the dying fireplace wrapped around the room like a thin blanket. Silas lowered Elena gently onto the couch. Her breathing was shallow, but steady. Her hair damp with melted snow. Her eyelashes dusted white. The dog collapsed by the hearth, chest rising and falling heavily. Silas stood there for a moment, hands on his knees, panting, body trembling, head spinning. He had fought a sniper, endured an explosion, killed Volkov with his bare hands, escaped a collapsing mine. But this, standing in the silence, looking at them both alive, this hit hardest. He stumbled to the stove, lit a flame, and placed a kettle on top. Elena watched him through half-open eyes. "You're hurt," she murmured. Silas didn't respond. He removed his shredded jacket, peeled off his blood-soaked undershirt. Deep purple bruises covered his ribs, cuts ran down his shoulders and back, dried blood streaked across his chest. Elena swallowed hard. "Sit down," she whispered. Silas shook his head. "You need heat, water. Your ankle." "Silas." Her voice was firmer than her body. He looked at her. "Sit," she repeated. Slowly, reluctantly. He did. Elena pushed herself upright, jaw clenched from the pain. She reached into the first aid kit on the small table. Her hands trembled as she cleaned one of the deeper cuts on his shoulder. Silas hissed, but didn't pull away. "You're always like this," she said quietly. "Like what?" "Carrying everyone else's weight." Bleeding quietly in the corner. He exhaled. "It's just what needs to be done." "No," she said, shaking her head. "That's what you tell yourself it is." Silas's jaw shifted, but he didn't argue. Elena's hand lingered longer than necessary on his shoulder. Warm, gentle, human, something he wasn't used to. She whispered, "You saved my life." Silas looked away. "I was in the right place at the right time." "No," she said. "You were there because you chose to be. You could have walked away." Silas didn't answer, because both of them knew it was true. The dog's turn. The dog whimpered. Silas immediately went to him, lowering himself onto the floor at his side. The animal's leg was swollen. The fur around the wound was matted with blood and dust. Silas stroked his head. "Easy. You did good." Elena crawled beside them, helping hold the dog steady as Silas inspected the injury. It wasn't broken, thank God, but the muscle was bruised badly, and the skin torn. Silas cleaned the wound, wrapped it tightly, and fed the dog warm broth once the kettle whistled. The dog licked Silas's hand weakly. Elena smiled faintly. "He loves you." Silas shook his head. "He's not my dog. That's not what he thinks." Silas didn't argue that either. Elena's turn. When the dog finally fell asleep beside the fire, Silas turned to Elena. Her ankle was badly twisted, maybe a partial ligament tear. Her ribs bruised. A gash on her forehead. Silas knelt in front of her and began cleaning the wound on her cheek. She winced. "You're gentler with the dog. He bites less." Her lips twitched into a smile, but then she watched him closely. His hands were steady, his eyes focused, his breathing controlled. A soldier, a protector, a man used to pain his own and others. "You've done this before," she said softly. "A lot." Silas paused for a fraction of a second, then resumed. "Once or twice." She didn't push, but her eyes said she understood more than he wanted her to. The question she had to ask. When he finished bandaging her ankle, she leaned back against the couch. The fire crackled softly. Wind howled outside. The dog snored faintly. It was the safest moment they'd had since they met. Elena's voice broke the quiet. "Silas, why were those men after me?" Silas sat down across from her on the floor. He had expected this. She had a right to know. But before he spoke, he studied her carefully. "How much do you remember from before the crash?" Elena's brow furrowed. "Bits. I was driving north, trying to get to the state border. I had evidence files against a cartel-backed laundering network. And Volkov," her voice cracked. He was involved. He wasn't supposed to know I was building a case. But he did. Someone leaked my movements. They wanted me dead before I could deliver the files. Silas nodded slowly. That's part of it. Elena looked at him sharply. What aren't you saying? Silas hesitated. The fire popped. He finally said, there was a second target on that road. Elena blinked. What? Not just you. Her breath caught. You mean? Silas nodded. They were also looking for me. She stared. Confused. Stunned. Afraid not of him, but of what that meant. Why? She whispered. Silas's jaw clenched. Because Volkov and I have history. Elena swallowed. History? How far back? Silas looked into the fire. Deep enough that he wanted me dead more than you. Elena's voice softened. Silas, who are you? He closed his eyes briefly. Then he gave her the truth he'd buried for years. I used to work for a unit that specialized in taking down men like Volkov. We were efficient. Too efficient. He exhaled slowly. One op went bad. My team didn't make it. Volkov did. Elena felt the weight of his words like a physical force. And you left? She whispered. I ran, Silas corrected. To a place no one could find me. But they did, she said softly. Silas nodded once. Because of you. Elena's breath caught again. Because of me. Your investigation lit up names, accounts, places. You were close, too close. And when you uncovered Volkov, he panicked. He ran straight into ghosts he thought were buried. Elena's eyes widened. You. Silas didn't deny it. Elena leaned forward. Pain forgotten. So we were both targeted, for different reasons, but at the same time. Silas nodded. You crashed because you were running from him. He paused. And he came up the mountain because he found out I was alive. Elena covered her mouth. Oh my God. She looked at him with new understanding. Deeper, heavier, sharper than before. You saved me, she whispered. But they came for you too. Silas lowered his gaze. I'm sorry. Elena shook her head fiercely. No. Don't do that. Don't you dare apologize for saving my life. Silas looked up. Her eyes were shining fear, exhaustion, but also something steadier. Gratitude, connection, trust. You didn't owe me anything, she said. But you stayed. You fought. You bled. And you didn't let me die. Silas opened his mouth, but found no words. Not because he didn't have them, but because no one had said something like that to him in a very long time. Elena reached out, hesitating for a moment, before placing her hand on his. Her voice softened. You're not alone anymore. Silas's breath caught. Just a fraction. Just enough for her to notice. But he didn't pull away. Not this time. The first quiet night. Hours passed. The fire warmed the room. Elena slept finally, peacefully wrapped in blankets on the couch. The dog lay by her side, head on her lap. Silas sat in a chair near the window, watching the storm ease outside. He wasn't sleeping. Pain kept him awake. Memories kept him sharper. But for the first time in years, he wasn't watching the door for enemies. He was watching it for morning. The mountain was silent. The mine was gone. Volkov was dead. For now, at least, they were safe. And Silas allowed himself a single, quiet thought. Maybe he didn't have to disappear again. Maybe this time, he didn't have to run. Sunlight broke through the storm slowly, first as a faint silver haze, then as a warm glow stretching across the mountainside. Inside the cabin, silence reigned. Not the tense, brittle silence of fear, but the soft, fragile quiet of survival. Silas stood at the window, watching frost melt from the glass. His breath fogged the air. His body ached with the aftermath of every bruise, cut, and slam. But for the first time in days, he wasn't preparing for someone to come through the trees. He wasn't gripping a rifle. He wasn't waiting for footsteps. He was simply breathing. A soft voice stirred behind him. Silas, he turned. Elena sat up on the couch wrapped in his oversized jacket, hair messy, eyes heavy but alive. Truly alive. The dog lifted his head from her lap and thumped his tail weakly. Silas moved toward her. How are you feeling? Like I fell down a mountain, she muttered. You did. She smiled faintly, then winced, as her ribs protested. Silas knelt beside her. You should rest. I've been resting. she whispered. I want to talk. Silas felt his chest tighten. He'd known this moment was coming. The choice. Elena's eyes studied him carefully, tracing every cut, every bruise, every shadow behind his gaze. Are we safe now? She asked. Silas didn't answer immediately. He sat down across from her, elbows on his knees. Volkov is gone, he said slowly. But men like him don't work alone. Someone ordered him up this mountain. Someone wanted you silenced. And someone still knows I'm alive. Elena swallowed. So, this isn't over. Silas shook his head once. No. The room was quiet. Then she asked the question she'd been holding since the moment she woke. What happens now? To us? Silas didn't expect the us to hit him as hard as it did. He looked away toward the window, where sunlight spilled across the snow. Elena, I'm not supposed to be part of the world anymore. She frowned. What does that even mean? I walked away, Silas said. From everything. From everyone. I buried the man I used to be. And yet, she whispered, that man saved me. He didn't respond. Not because he disagreed, but because he didn't know how to accept it. Elena reached forward, fingers brushing his arm. You can't go back into hiding, she said. Not after this. They know you're alive. They'll keep coming. Silas's jaw tightened. I know. And you think the answer is to run again? Silas stared at the floor. I don't think I have a choice. Elena's voice cracked. You do. You have me. Silas looked up sharply. Her eyes glistened not with fear, but with a fierce kind of resolve. I'm not asking for anything, she said. I know you didn't save me for that. But you don't have to do this alone anymore. Silas exhaled. Long and slow. Elena, you barely know me. I know enough, she whispered. A beat. Silas looked at her bruised face, her trembling hands, her courage, and something in his chest shifted. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't wanted this. But the truth was quiet and undeniable. He didn't want her to leave. Not now. Maybe not ever. But before he could speak, the dog barked low, cautious. Both of them turned toward the window. Something had moved in the trees. Silas rose instantly, pain, forgotten eyes narrowing. Elena's breath hitched. Is it? Silas shook his head. No footsteps, no engines. Just an animal, I think. But he didn't sound sure. He stood frozen for a moment, studying the tree line. Only when the branches settled and the quiet returned, did he slowly step back from the window. Elena watched him carefully. You don't think danger is gone, she said. Silas didn't lie. No, I don't. What they can't outrun. Elena pulled the blanket tighter around her. We can't stay here, she whispered. They'll send someone to check on Volkov eventually. When he doesn't report in, Silas nodded. They'll know something happened. And they'll come. He nodded again. Elena's voice softened. Then we need to leave the mountain. Silas hesitated. He looked around the cabin, the only home he'd known, for years. His sanctuary. His exile. Elena, I can't go back to the world down there. Her expression faltered. You mean you won't, she whispered. There's a difference. He didn't reply, so she leaned closer, close enough that he had to meet her eyes. Silas, listen to me. You saved my life. You put your body between me and bullets. You carried me through a blizzard. You fought a man who's been hunting you for years. Her voice trembled. And you're telling me you can't face going into town? Silas's jaw worked silently. She wasn't mocking him. She wasn't judging. She was pleading. You're not the only one with scars, she said quietly. I lost people too. I trusted someone and got betrayed. I went after criminals and became a target. I was left to die in the snow. Her eyes softened. But you came back for me. You found me. Silas swallowed. Elena, you didn't leave me behind, she whispered. So don't make me leave you behind. Something inside his chest broke. The old armor, the old exile, the old silence he wore like a second skin. He looked away, voice rough. If I go down that mountain, I can't guarantee I'll come back. Elena shook her head gently. Then I'll go with you. He met her eyes again. What are you saying? She took a breath. This mountain isn't safe. The world isn't safe. But safety was never the point. Her voice softened. Survival is. Silas stared at her. And you think you'll survive with me? Elena's answer was immediate. I already did. He froze. Then slowly something eased in his expression. Attention uncoiled. A wall lowered. He looked at the dog. The dog thumped his tail once. Approval. Elena smiled softly. Silas drew a long breath, one that felt like it came from a place he hadn't touched in years. And he finally said the word she needed to hear. All right. Elena's eyes widened. Silas continued. We'll leave. Together. Relief pure, overwhelming washed through her. She closed her eyes, hand trembling. Silas stood and helped her to her feet. She swayed. He steadied her instantly. I've got you, he murmured. She looked up at him. I know. The first step toward the unknown. Silas packed quickly essentials. Weapons. Medical kits. Food. Elena dressed slowly, leaning on the table as she moved. The dog limped after them, determined to stay close. Silas opened the cabin door. A rush of clean, cold air swept in. He turned back to Elena. You ready? She nodded. Silas glanced once more at the cabin. The home that saved him. The home he now had to leave behind. He whispered a quiet goodbye. To the silence. To the past. To the man he used to be. Then he stepped into the snow. Elena took his hand. The dog trotted between them. Together, they began the long descent down the mountain. Toward the world. Toward danger. Toward whatever waited for them next. And somewhere far off, hidden in the shadow of the pines, a faint glint of metal watched them leave. Not animal. Not accident. A lens. A signal receiver. Someone. Unknown. Unseen. Had been listening. Had been waiting. And now, they knew exactly where Silas Kincaid was going.